Okay, good morning everybody and welcome to the February Public Assurance meeting. We will do a quick round of introductions so that people know who is at the table. I'm Marc Jones, the Police and Crime Commissioner.
I'm Stuart Tweedale, Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner.
Bill Skelly, Chief Constable.
Jason Owen, Deputy Chief Constable.
Karen Wilson, Assistant Chief Constable.
Andrew White, Assistant Chief Officer.
Julie Flint, Chief Finance Officer to the Police and Crime Commissioner.
Aubrey Williams, Research and Performance for the Commissioner.
Okay, so just checking, have we any apologies today?
No apologies.
I have one from Malcolm Birch, the Chief Executive of the Police and Crime Commissioner's office. So as long as he doesn't hear that today, Aubrey, you'll be fine. Moving on to the next section, public questions. Have we received any public questions in time to be asked today?
No, we've received no public questions for this public assurance meeting.
Okay, so moving on then, there are two main elements to the meeting format. First is a focus looking at a particular area of business, and then we move into the integrated performance report from the Chief Constable. So today's focus is around roads policing and road safety. So over to you, Chief, to talk to the report.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Road safety is a priority for the force as it is a priority for the county. What we're going to do this morning is talk to some of the areas of focus that we are bringing as the service to our efforts to reduce the number of injuries that take place within our road network. It is a very large road network with some challenges around it that some areas don't have. We have seen over the last 2 years what I would describe as a worrying trend of increasing fatalities and serious injuries on our roads, which is kind of bucking a trend for the decades before, which have seen large decreases, largely as a result of improvements to the safety of vehicles, as much as the improvements to the engineering of our road network, and improved driver behaviour. But as I say, the last couple of years would suggest that in this area, some of that problem is reversing and we're seeing more injuries taking place. So it is an absolute necessity that we, as the enforcement agency, work with partners in order to try and reduce those injuries taking place. What we have today is a presentation on some of those issues that we are bringing forward for the coming year and beyond. And I would like to ask the Assistant Chief Constable, Karen Wilson, to talk us through some of the elements of that report.
Thank you, Commissioner. The report in full, I believe, is going to be available online, so people can actually read through that in detail. But if I can just highlight some of the areas of interest in the report and then invite you to ask any questions that you have. So up until April last year, the roads policing function was part of our East Midlands Specialist Operations function, shared with our neighbours in Leicestershire and Northamptonshire. And with those forces, we had the management structure and the governance structure was under a chief superintendent who was based in Leicestershire, who covered all three forces in terms of the direction and control. Although we did feed into that direction and control some of the issues that we might need to deploy staff to. In April, we made a decision alongside our colleagues in the other forces to bring that function back locally, so that we were having the local footprint, the local direction control and the local management and governance structures back within Lincolnshire Police. The shared services of training, analysis and ensuring that we've got the standards is still maintained within the specialist operations training element for the three forces. What this meant for Lincolnshire was that for the first time for quite some time we had local direction control from local superintendent, and that has taken us in leaps and bounds forward in terms of how we're actually going to deliver roads policing as well as the rest of our specialist functions. So Superintendent Paul Timmins has taken over that function. He's worked closely with the Road Safety Partnership. He's also worked closely with some of the initiatives that we have to enhance them, and is in the process of developing our local roads policing strategy, which will be launched in April coming. Some of the areas for the report then are that the current model has roads policing covered with armed response units as well as the specialist search training units, and there's only a couple of dedicated roads policing officers in that model. So we do cover it, but it's not a sole function. The intention is that we will build that up to have officers who are dedicated solely to the roads policing function in future years. We also have special constables who are part of the road safety team, the Safer Roads team, and they are very dedicated and deliver a phenomenal amount of return for what we get from the road safety piece. We've also introduced community speed watch teams, and they are working with the community, having volunteers out in the community who will be able to support and deliver for those local neighbourhoods in terms of identifying where the risks are, and help them to deter and educate speeding drivers, mainly who are coming through villages and towns. The data that we've got on page 3, which the Chief Constable mentioned in terms of the trend over the last few years, the trend for killed and seriously injured has gone up in terms of those killed. It's fairly static for seriously injured, but anybody who is injured on these roads is still a worry for us. And we're doing an awful lot to try and address that and try and analyse exactly who those individuals are, what particular groups we might be able to target. And in this county, we've got predominantly drivers over the age of 65 or young drivers under the age of 24 who seem to be more prevalent at being subjected to these particular terrible situations. So we're doing some enforcement, but we're also doing some education, and I know the Commissioner's supported with the driving awareness courses for under 25s and the Too Fast Too Soon education programme that we have going. We've, in addition to the road safety, the specials that we have and the communities involved, we've still got, and we still have directed neighbourhood and response patrols to support each of the policing initiatives in those neighbourhood areas. The neighbourhood teams have 3 key areas that are identified every month that they will address and put some effort into spending time to tackle road safety enforcement. And that's predominantly around the fatal fall requirements of the strategy. But we also have some activity split across the whole engineering, enforcement and education piece, which we then work with partners to be able to address some of those longer term and more complex issues on our road network. If I can turn to page 5 on the report under the enforcement, it highlights at the top there that we've got an extensive camera safety enforcement system across the county. And we have 80 mobile camera sites which will move across the county, and that's based on the intelligence and the analysis that we do in terms of where the numbers of accidents occur. We've also got 50 static cameras and some average speed cameras, and what we do with the information that comes from those cameras is use the national driver improvement schemes and retraining schemes to address and tackle poor driving behaviour. So we do offer that out quite substantially across the county.
I think it's worth making a point, because this is an issue which is occasionally raised by the public with us, is that the use of speed cameras is some kind of a revenue gathering exercise. I just want to, for the record, make it really clear that Lincolnshire Police and our partners use speed enforcement cameras in order to improve the safety on our roads. Speed is still one of the most significant factors in injury and death, and we will continue to use that as a tool in order to improve our road safety. So I think just for the record, because occasionally we do get people who say this is just about gathering revenue, that is absolutely not the case.
Thank you. Motorbikes on our roads, because of the road network, especially in the summertime, we do attract a lot of people from out of the county who come into the county to explore and appreciate the beauty of the county, but not always as patient as they should be. So we have an enforcement and education campaign ongoing, which is Operation Octane, and we ramp that up in the summer as well. And that is, we also do Bike Safe, which is motorcycle focused training to ensure that people who are coming into that world of riding motorbikes can handle the motorbikes in a much safer way. And then we also link in with the National Police Chiefs campaign on road safety, which is a monthly focus on various different elements of the fatal fall. And over the Christmas we've seen Operation Blackwater, which worked in conjunction with the NPCC operation to tackle alcohol and drug driving throughout December. You'll see on the bottom of page 5 there the numbers of arrests and interventions that we've had, which is really high. But that is worrying that we still have so many people who do have alcohol and drug misuse while they're behind the wheel of a car. But one of the new initiatives that we did introduce was a text service last year for members of the public to actually get in touch with the police and highlight anybody that they had concerns about. And as a result of that, we had 63 reports come in through December. We haven't got the specific piece of analysis to determine what each one of those led to, but we will be encouraging the use of that and starting to look at the analysis piece of that later down the line. Looking forward, we are working with the Department of Transport and our colleagues across other police forces and other agencies, highways agencies, etc., to do some analysis and academic research into why the road traffic accidents nationally are not going down as much as they should do. I mean, we do have a huge amount more vehicles on the road than we did 10 years ago, so that will be part of it, but they'll be doing some detailed analysis, and we're quite hooked into that particular piece of work. We've been doing a lot of work with the Highways England as well to help support policing of the A1. It's not a motorway, so they don't automatically give us the support. So they're working with us to establish a base in Grantham where they will work from, and then we'll have a much closer and aligned team that can jointly tackle the issues that we need to address. And we're also focusing on some new technology in the form of dash cam footage, and how do we actually get that dash cam footage sent directly in from users into police forces so that we can actually use it lifetime. And happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I mean, I think it's one of those areas where it is a partnership approach. It isn't exclusively the realm of policing to solve how we reduce deaths and serious injuries on our roads. It is one element of a wider approach, which is why we have the partnership looking at that across Lincolnshire, which the police are part of. So whilst accepting that it is part of that partnership approach, one of the things I would say, and I cover a lot of miles around the county and indeed into other counties, is that actually I think despite you will always get complaints about the state of roads and potholes and everything else. As I drive around, I've never seen so many stretches of roads being repaired, being replaced, improvements to roundabouts. The actual engineering side of it, I think Lincolnshire punches above its weight, given the 5,500 miles of road it's trying to cover, mainly with B&C networks. So from a partnership point of view, that's just a thank you to the County Council for the work that they're doing on that side of things. I mean, it is a concern that the figures aren't going in the right direction. I guess from time to time, when you look at this over a long period of time, that can sometimes happen, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't be trying to find the reasons and bear down upon it. And I absolutely welcome the fact that the force is putting in place a roads policing strategy for the county, and I think that needs to sit very neatly alongside the road safety strategy that the partnership is putting together. But it seems perfectly appropriate that you would have a separate strand which is about the policing element. And certainly I've had Superintendent Paul Timmins come to brief me on the work around that, which is great. I think some of the numbers that are in here are quite startling. The Safer Roads team, which is the specials unit that's put together over 444 operational shifts in the first year, which is 4,300 volunteer hours supporting our communities being safe. A huge amount of offences that they have dealt with, and who knows how many lives saved as a result. So, you know, I know it's very annoying for people if they get stopped for speeding, but you never know, they might have gone home to see their loved ones as a result of having been stopped for speeding. So they're the kind of things that are very hard to measure what didn't happen as a result of positive activity. One of the areas I think that certainly I was spoken to a lot by communities about was speeding through their local community, and actually, to be fair, it's reasonable to say that most people that are speeding through the local community live in it or the next village. So actually it's about changing behaviour amongst community members to make us all better citizens for each other. And that's borne out by the fact that now 251 parishes in Lincolnshire out of our 507 are taking part in the Community Speed Watch is huge. Nearly 600 volunteers supporting that. And I think that this all is part of that changing culture. So the fact that those people are not driving, you know, they don't deliver fines to anybody. It's not about the cash, it's about changing culture. So resulting in 7,500 first warning letters, a reduction down to 406 second warning letters, just shows the huge impact it's had on people getting even the first letter. But then only 56 people have had that third intervention, which has been an actual visit by a member of the policing team to their address. That's from 7,500 down to 46. That's a huge cultural shift, and I think parishes that are considering road safety issues could do a lot worse than engage with us and the Road Safety Partnership to get involved in that initiative. It really has made a huge difference. And I suppose the question I would have as we move forward is when will we see the new strategy? What will it mean in practice? When will we actually see that strategy turn into action plan and actually a positive change on the ground would be my sort of first big question around that. And also with regard to the fact that we're seizing so many vehicles, and I can't get away from the fact that, you know, that's a huge number of vehicles being seized on our roads, sort of nearly 200 a month being seized. And obviously I'm aware of another operation that we've run alongside that, Operation Tutelage, which was using the remote camera network to identify uninsured drivers to actually, again, take that almost community speed watch approach of letting them know, because sometimes it might just be a day or two over or whatever, rather than willful ignoring of the rules. That doesn't seem to have had an impact on the number of vehicles we're seizing. And I'm interested to understand what's happening there, because I thought we would see the advisory bit leading to a reduction in vehicles seized. Because if we're seizing 200 vehicles, I was trying to calculate this, I was sort of thinking, well, if it's 20 minutes to do the stop and 40 minutes to wait for a tow truck, you're employing 15 officers full time just to wait at the side of the road while vehicles are seized, which is a huge resource. So if we can have the same amount of activity but actually reduce the impact on your officer numbers dealing with that, then that's obviously a good thing. So I just don't know whether we've got any information around that area of work.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner. If I can deal with the op tutelage and the vehicle seizures first, I don't have the specific details of op tutelage, but we have used that quite extensively to change some behaviours, so I'm happy to bring back, whether it's to this or send a separate report in, just to give a cover of that and the analysis of what we think might be going forward from that. In relation to the roads policing strategy, that will be ready for launch in April. We're also working alongside the Road Safety Partnership, because they're refreshing their strategy. I think that's a 3-year strategy, but we're bringing that forward so that we can work in conjunction with each other. I don't have the specific date when the partnership are going to have theirs ready. In relation to the impact that the strategy will have and what the outcomes will be, we're starting to see them already. So although the strategy isn't there, some of the work that we're doing that will be captured in the strategy is actually starting to take place, such as identifying where our worst roads are, identifying where we need to deploy some of our neighbourhood teams, as well as working with people like the Highways Agency. So the returns will start coming in. They're coming in now, but you will see that pretty quickly. We will have an evaluation of the strategy and an annual report done from that strategy to see exactly where we are, and an annual refresh of it, even though the strategy will be set for 3 years, I think it is. So I'm more than happy to bring something back to the next one in June with an update about where we are on both those things.
So just supporting carrying around the roads a bit, I think it's also important to remember that criminality travels on the roads, and whilst exceptions about the safety focus there particularly, the recovery of vehicles is a disruption tactic, if I'll be honest, around criminality as well. So again, we've had some work done linked into our demand profiling around gaps in our capability around making the roads a bit more hostile, not just a bit more hostile in terms of travelling criminality throughout the county. And again, there is some plans linked into the good work that Karen's doing around the strategy to make sure we can connect that better. Again, to make sure that we're not seen as an easy hit from surrounding forces, particularly when we've got such a big road network as well.
Thank you for that, Deputy. The other area as well, and I think you've been particularly generous in your wording in this, around the A1 and Highways England's involvement, because you make the point of more patrolling activity where we know they don't do any patrolling activity in the Lincolnshire stretch of the A1, and that actually there have been some really robust conversations going on between policing, myself and the Highways Agency, and also the local Grantham MP has been very forthright in trying to support having a safer stretch of A1 through Lincolnshire, which is very welcome. And actually they have been very receptive to that, and given that their words to me were, we know that mile for mile it's more dangerous than any stretch of the M1, I think that that's reasonable that they respond to that. And obviously I understand there were roughly around 60 interventions that Lincolnshire Police having to make on the Lincolnshire stretch of A1 that you would reasonably expect Highways England to be dealing with. And again, that's demand that's taking up your officer time. So I think that's a really important piece of work, just to make sure that all partners are doing their bit, rather than it falling disproportionately onto policing. So I think that's very welcome. Just picking up your point, Jason, on the sort of more criminality on our roads, and I think this is something that we would recognise, that if you can't easily travel to our communities on our road network to commit crime, then our communities are safer. So working on that as an aside from the road safety angle, to actually say, well, how are we policing the roads to keep our communities safer and make it harder for criminals to access, whether it's burglary, vehicle crime, breaking into commercial vehicles, premises, whatever it is, you've got to physically travel to the location and from it. And I think that is one of those challenges nationally, but in big rural areas it's particularly challenging. So I look forward to sort of seeing that work develop. And equally, I know that our partners, whether they're parish councils, town councils, are keen to help support that and keep their communities safe. So, you know, I'm sure we'll be able to develop a partnership approach to that, not just, again, it being a policing only objective. Yeah, I mean, I think the roads are one of those areas where they are, there's a level of acceptance around the seriousness of certain injuries and loss of life on there that you just wouldn't see in any other area. And I find that very difficult to understand why there's that level of acceptance. And certainly it's not something that I know you or I do subscribe to. So it is that balance between sort of allowing people to go about their lawful business, but also at the same time trying to keep them safe and well so that they can get home at the end of the night. So I think I welcome the work that we're doing with the Community Safety Partnership on all sorts of issues, the Road Safety Partnership around that wider piece, the road policing strategy I look forward to seeing more detail on. And then obviously one of the areas of priority that the Chief and I agreed on with the council tax increase, which we'll put forward in the budget as we set it in the next few days, will be around, well, what else can we achieve in that element of keeping criminality off our roads? So I think there'll be a lot to look forward to there. Anything else somebody wants to add on that section before we move on? Okay. So moving on then, the integrated performance report, there's a lot of information in there, and again the report is published through the website of the Office of Police and Crime Commissioner, so if anybody wants to look at the detail, it's all published in there, but over to you, Chief.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'll just say a few words by way of general introduction to the report, and then we will, as a team, look at each of the sections, predominantly focusing on the pages which are described as the Chief Constable's commentary, because they are essentially drawing out the highlights as far as we're concerned, but we are more than happy to pick up points which are not necessarily contained in the commentary and as we go through it. So by way of kind of general introduction, last week we had published the Integrated Appeal Assessment by Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary Fire and Rescue Service, and that is a big inspection which looks at a number of different aspects in which the forces ran, and that looks at our leadership roles and the legitimacy, it looks at the effectiveness of policing, and it looks at the efficiency with which we carry out our work. I'm very pleased that the report gave us two goods. We felt we were kind of knocking on the door of the third good, which would have been good across the board, and the criticism which we didn't get a good in that area is still around issues of our ability as a force to be able to accurately kind of forward plan, and despite the fact that we did make it very clear to the inspection team that, well, that's because of the resourcing levels, the historic levels, the funding levels. We do have plans, but they are all kind of subject to whatever government is able to kind of make available to us, and indeed they only become crystal clear once you are able to be very sure of what your resources are. HMIC have made some comment on that in that they acknowledge the position of the force around its funding, which is welcome, that the Inspector is finally acknowledging that that is a part of how you're able to police an area. But they felt that there was still some gaps to be filled around the planning arena, and for that reason they're looking at us next year to have filled that gap. So we feel that we've made significant progress, and we feel that the report itself is a very positive endorsement of where the force sits, and that we fully expect that we will continue to develop the areas that we have identified. So on the whole, a positive report, which goes to the kind of general running of the police service in Lincolnshire. Specifically, they were very complimentary in areas which we will allude to or directly refer to as we go through the rest of the Integrated Performance Report today, areas such as custody and so on. We're also imminently expecting that we will have a publication in relation to our crime data integrity, and again for the public. Essentially, HMIC FRS have been conducting inspections across all forces in England and Wales, where they look at the information you hold as a force and how much of that information has been recorded as individual crimes, and they are therefore comparing your information to the number of crimes that you have. We were inspected just over a year ago, and unfortunately there was a part of our process that wasn't working properly, so we got quite a poor report in relation to that comparison. We have been re-inspected. A lot of work led by the Deputy and others within the force area have addressed the shortcomings, and we feel confident that that report will show that we've made significant strides and in fact are amongst the best in the country now when in those areas. So it's we haven't got the full report yet. We're expecting it kind of fairly imminently. What it does mean, though, is that in that intervening period, there has been a significant rise in recorded crime in a number of different areas, much of which is as a result of the better recording processes that we have put in place. That is a theme that you see right across all of the forces that are inspected. Once they're inspected, there are significant rises in their recorded crime in the following 12 to 18 months. What we are now seeing, as other forces have, is that that is levelling off. And in some cases, we're seeing some reduction. So we've almost, if you like, reset the bar, reset the dial to what is a more, as far as the counting rules are concerned, a more realistic picture of crime within the county. And that means that we've got figures which, on comparison, are showing really very significant rises. We are also clear, and I am clear as Chief, that there are within that genuine concerns about some areas of crime that are reported which are showing increases anyway. It has been difficult to strip out the, if you like, CDI effect, the crime recording effect from our numbers, but everybody in the force has been working hard to understand the underlying trends and some rises that we've seen worryingly in areas, for example, of violence and robbery. The Deputy has worked with the command teams and across departments to put together an improvement plan around our operational activity, and I'm sure he will want to speak to some elements of that as we go through the report. So the context then, in summary, is that we have a very positive report from the Inspectorate in relation to the overall running of the force. We feel, made great strides in terms of our compliance with counting rules around recorded crime. That has got a latent effect in terms of increases in recorded crime, but I accept that there are some underlying issues that definitely need addressed, and we now have a very firm plan in place as to how we're going to approach those issues in the coming year. Indeed, a lot of activity has already started in relation to that. So those are the sort of words I just want by general introduction to the report itself, and then my intention was that we would go through each section. If that's okay, Commissioner? Yeah. In which case, as I say, particularly referring to page 9 of the report, which is the Chief Constable's commentary, or my commentary in relation to the first section, which looks at overall demand, crime and response. I've said all I really want to say in relation to the all crime figures. There's a bit more of a narrative there in relation to the crime data inspection and the Office for National Statistics figures. But I want to hand over to other members of my team just to talk through the next 3 items, which are about place-based approach, crime prevention, and our approach to violence. So I'm going to invite the Assistant Chief Constable to talk to the first, certainly the first of those, perhaps the first 2, and then the Deputy to the violent crime. Sorry.
Okay, thank you, Chief. So place-based approach. What we're looking at here, Commissioner, is having identified through our partnership data and our data about areas of high deprivation, low interventions, high crime area, school exclusion rates, etc., to come up with models that have been seen to be used across the country and have worked quite substantially to try and change how that community actually operates. But it's about working with the community. This is not about agencies, the police service or any of the partners coming in and saying to a community, this is what we're going to do to you and we're going to make everything rosy and then leave you, and in a couple of years' time it all goes back to the way it had been. This is about working with the community to help them identify the areas that we want to support them with. and how they can help change the perceptions of their communities, but they also get involved and they take a very hands-on approach to that. There's a couple of different organisations around the country who have done this and supported police forces. I think even Grenfell Tower have got a place-based approach operation going on with it at the moment. So this is about bringing the communities together, identifying a couple of those different areas, and also working with partners, working with the local authority in those places, working with the Stronger Towns funds that we might be able to tap into in terms of supporting that funding, identifying with the communities what they want to do and how they want to see their communities change and what they think some of that long-term change needs to be. So there's a process of participatory budget, so there's a pot of money that's put to one side and then the communities bid for what will make the biggest difference to that and they vote on that. So then the money and the effort and the energy goes into supporting the communities to change how things operate in their area. The impact that we'll see later down the line for policing is that this should reduce the antisocial behaviour, the criminality and the demand on services and vulnerability of services for policing, but also for partners. So this is a long-term approach to address that. The second piece that I wanted to talk to was about violence. I've launched a violence reduction initiative in force last month, bringing together all of the different strands of policing within Lincolnshire Police, and we are now starting to step into bringing partners into that. Disappointingly, the ONS figures, the national statistic figures that came out at the beginning of January showed that Lincolnshire Police had a 74% increase in violent crime, which was the highest increase in violent crime across the country. The Chief's already described about the crime data integrity effect in terms of those increases. But if we look at some of our changes in our recording standards, we've seen something like 5,000 less antisocial behaviour crimes a year, and we've got 7,000 increases in violent crimes a year. A lot of those antisocial behaviour incidents have now translated into crimes. So because of our recording systems, we do record a lot more than we had done previously. There's also duplicate crimes that go into there. So if we've got a domestic abuse situation where there was a violent crime, we now have several crimes that might come as a result of that, such as coercion and controlling behaviour. So new legislation that's come in has increased how we record some of that. The thing for me, though, is not that the communities of Lincolnshire will not be bothered about just the recording standards, and I want to make sure that we give them the outcomes that they need, which is actually tackling the real harm that is happening in communities. So bringing together the different elements within our force about looking at killed and seriously injured on our roads, which actually do contribute to violent crime, looking at domestic abuse, looking at knife crime, nighttime economy crime, bringing all of that together so that we can share that best practice. We have the same standards right across the county, so it doesn't become a postcode lottery of one particular neighbourhood area doing one thing that another neighbourhood area might not be doing. Learning from the violent crime reduction units which are set up and down the country. Sadly, we haven't been able to bid and been successful in getting any further government funding that some forces have. So we're trying to do and mirror what they're doing, but without any funding. So bringing those things together, putting together some strategies for addressing all of those things, learning the best practice, making sure that that best practice and that behaviour is sent right across all of our different teams within Lincolnshire Police to do the reduction of it, investigate and get the best outcomes for victims, get offenders brought to justice, and do some work on prevention so that they don't go on to repeat that poor behaviour in the future. There's the strategy there, and if there's any questions that you have on any of those two things, but I'll pass over to the Deputy for now.
Well, I think we will just pause for questions at that point, but the Again reminding the public in relation to violent crime offences, there are essentially two broad categories: violence with injury and violence without injury, which can be, even to us within the service, confusing. I can only imagine what it must be like to the public to hear that. But there are a number of offences, such as internet-enabled offences of harassment, which are recorded as violent crimes. And those are areas which have seen huge increases in the last 2 to 3 years, and they continue to show increases. The crime, we obviously record those, and we do treat them seriously. The ones which I think are more aligned to a public perception of violence or violence with injury, such as those offences of physical violence, such as we see within domestic abuse and sexual offending, and such as those kind of that we see within a robbery offences. So those ones have had less increases overall, but they are absolutely the focus of the violent crime strategy, and are the ones that we are making sure that we are giving our full attention towards. So it's just to kind of separate out the two issues. When you look at them put together, it may sound like a very, very violent county. Actually, there's a complexity to it which can often mask what's going on. I just want to make sure that people take a little bit of time to read the report in full, which will explain some of that detail that I've just referred to. But I think if we pause at that point, just to see if there's any questions at all, then we can, before moving on.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. I mean, it is a very confusing area, and most people's perception of violence is a physical attack of some kind or another, malicious communication, which we're obviously seeing a growing area through internet and telephone. Mobile communication is something that masks what the public's perception might be around that, and I think that is an interesting thing, particularly as we've seen that switch from certain things being recorded as antisocial behaviour. Now we're seeing them recorded as violence without injury. So realistically, as I've gone around the county, what most people are saying is we haven't seen a reduction in physical antisocial behaviour. It's probably very similar to where it was, but so it's reasonable to take that number of reduction there and move it straight across as being one of those consequences of changing in recording. I suppose there's a couple of things based on what you've discussed. Place-based approach in particular seems to make eminent sense, that actually you look at the community as a whole. You don't look at it as a policing problem. It's a bit like the way the Lincolnshire Police very proactively chose to not police football matches as a public order issue so much as an event that was happening in the community, and so rather than seeing it as just a policing problem, it becomes how do we support the community to actually deliver what the community wants and needs. I suppose the challenge there is I would question, and this might be rhetorical because you might not have the evidence on this yet, but other areas that have done this, I would have thought if there are areas where they've got particular challenges around crime and also deprivation and other challenges of a social nature, if you provide them with the confidence to actually work together, we might see an increase in recorded crime in the short term, because actually there'll be an increase in confidence. And I guess it's understanding if that's likely to occur, because obviously if it does, we don't want to see that as failure if it's a known part of the process. The other element for me, you mentioned having a place-based budget. I'm intrigued as to where that comes from and the size of it. Because obviously if it comes from the Police and Crime Commissioner, that means you've got less resource to put into other areas of business. So I'm trying to understand, is that a partnership approach to a place budget, in which case, has that actually gone anywhere, or is this something that's going to be part of the process as we move forward? Regarding the violence elements, I mean, in some respect, the irony being, it's great news that we can't access money for violence reduction units because they went to the 18 areas of the country that most needed it. So I would rather have the problem of not having the budget than being first in the queue for the budget. But it is a real challenge when we go from significant resources being given to those 18 areas to no resources at all being given to the others. And I think there is a recognition nationally that there needs to be something done to those areas that aren't inside that 18. and that's something that obviously I take forward on my side to try and lobby for those additional resources in conjunction with yourselves. One of the things that I'm keen to make sure we weave into this is around restorative justice, to make sure that that's an integral part of that strategy, because I think it is really important that sort of victims of crime get that opportunity and that it's really embedded as part of the ethos, because we know it can be hugely impactful to victims getting the answers that they want and need, but actually in changing behaviours in perpetrators as well. And obviously, ultimately, if somebody has made, shall I say, an error of judgment that can then be corrected and they don't repeat it, then that's obviously keeping us all safer. So some comments around RJ as well would be greatly appreciated.
Thanks, Commissioner. In relation to the budget, the participatory budget for communities, we have set aside a small amount, but we're also hoping to work with partners to access money from the Safer Towns funds, etc. And these participatory budgets are not a huge amount that will actually make a big difference. So in one particular initiative that I've previously experienced, it was £10,000 that was put aside for a whole community over a year's period of time that they could bid into. The evaluation that's been done previously and of these type of initiatives has been gone through the rigour of academic evaluation, and you do see some areas where you might get some increases in calls for service for different things, not just for policing initially, because people are more confident in working with those services as opposed to thinking that they're completely on their own. But I have also noticed that some of the engagement activities that had previously happened, where they wanted the police to run those engagement activities, stopped happening because they were running them themselves. And they were actually taking control of their own engagement activities and identifying and chairing what they wanted in their communities. So eventually, it came to be less need on the services for certain things such as their engagement, but yes, more need when things didn't go right in those communities because we're more confident in actually contacting people. In relation to the victims and the restorative justice, I was going to come on to that at the victims part in the report, but we're definitely doing something around restorative justice, so I can update you further as we go through it.
So the last bit within this section was around prevention. So I think we all accept, in terms of the police service, that our focus on crime must continue. And as the HMIC field inspection showed, in terms of how we investigate crime, actually we're very good at it in Lincolnshire. However, it's all right, well and good investigating crime, but ultimately we want to try and prevent crime in the first place. So one of the things that certainly has changed over the last couple of months is, again, through the Safer Together partnership, a joint prevention strategy, which obviously focuses on 6 key areas realistically, has been agreed. And again, linked into that plan, that strategy, is an overall plan of what we're going to do over the next 3 years. Now, again, importantly from the force, we see the evidence base shows us the focus on reoffending and make sure we've got an appropriate multi-agency response to that makes a real difference. So again, we have put some investment back into that over the last 12 months, and it's an area that we'll put further investment in the coming months as well. Now we've got the financial position and obviously planning around it. The key bit around all this is that we know that a lot of prevention work is, again, working with communities. So the work that Kevin's touched on there about the place-based element within communities, about how they can help us to help themselves. But just as importantly, we know 1/3 of all house burglaries are done through insecure property. So again, we'll come to the summer period shortly where cars will be left undone, windows left undone. They're all things that we can actually stop. And again, not just stopping demand, but stopping being a victim of a crime in the first place. So again, part of the campaign, the prevention campaign, is again how we can work closer with not just particularly targeted communities where there are more risk of being a victim of crime, but just at the same time making sure we're stopping everybody in victim crime as much as we can as well. Just going back to the violent crime, again, this is important, and I know people sometimes ask the question about figures, but to be a chances of being a victim of violent crime with an injury is 0.8% in this county. So that's a really important message, actually. Your chance of being a victim of violent crime with an injury is 0.8%. And overall violent crime is 3%. So whilst we're seeing the increases, chances still being a victim here are still very, very low. And again, it's important we balance that in terms of our response as well.
Yeah, I think just to say, obviously, the crime prevention piece is that true partnership working. That isn't something that can be done alone, and in particular, it's a horrible term, target hardening, but making our communities more resilient and resistant to crime is something that's particularly important. And we know it's the same thing. We're coming up to that time of year where we know people will get their sheds broken into if they're insecure. You know, this is the time of year when people need to be making sure that's done. It's a seasonal pattern that we know is going to come. But certainly, I mean, one of the areas that I think nationally we're struggling to grapple with is around fraud and scams and how we intervene. In Lincolnshire, I think we're in a reasonably good pace as a partnership around that. But that is an area, again, that we know can be really debilitating for people if they lose their life savings through whatever means. So, you know, we want to... the physical world of crime, but it is no longer as easy to separate, is it, from things that may happen online. So it's how we join those together as well. But certainly the partnership approach, I think, is a very welcome one, and a new strategy around that is good. So yeah, moving on to the next section.
Thank you, Commissioner. So we're going to talk about demand and response, which is at page 12 in terms of the Chief's commentary. We've covered road traffic as the separate item at the commencement of this meeting, so I don't intend covering that again. A few general words of introduction by me, and then I'll pass on to Mr. White, who can talk a little bit more about some of the detail in terms of the force control room, and which is where demand predominantly comes into the service, and then it's allocated out, having gone through a number of processes, to officers predominantly within our response arena. Generally speaking, we've had days where call demand has been exceptionally high, and we've had other days where it's been within the normal range that we would expect. We've also, in terms of being able to meet that demand, it's a fairly straightforward connection between the number of people you have available to deploy and the demand that is coming in for them to respond to. And as you can see from the response times, there's been a general increase in the time it's taken to get to particularly kind of immediate response calls for quite a period of time. We will continue as a force to look at different ways in which we can handle that demand within the control room environment without having to deploy officers, so that officers are only going to the things which they can add value to and the things which are requiring an immediate attendance of a police officer. We will continue to work on that. I would state it again, I think we said it last meeting, I am convinced that the only really significant way that will kind of change is with more resources in the service in Lincolnshire, and with the announcements by central government to increase policing resources by way of police officer numbers, we will see a increase certainly within the next 12 months, and we are anticipating within the next 3 years that will take us to a very different position from where we were over the last year and over the previous 7 or 8 years. So that I think will offer us the best and biggest opportunity to address historic issues of under-resourcing within Lincolnshire that I know has been a great concern for you and has been a concern for myself and my predecessors as Chief Constable. We're not just pinning all our hopes on that. There are still things that we feel we can do to better manage that demand versus available resources, simple kind of relationship, and no doubt Mr. White will refer to them in his kind of update. So at that point, I think I'll pass over to you, Andrew.
So, I mean, as the Chief Constable alluded to, we've put a tremendous focus on the force control room over the past 12 months, not simply in terms of time taken to respond to calls, but what service public get when they return, when they are answered. So about 12 months ago, we introduced new threat, harm and risk processes to better assess what the elements of threat, harm and risk were, to callers and incidents being recorded so that we could better assess the required response. So that took a greater amount of time at the initial point of contact, but we believe that that translated into better service, better assessment of priority moving forward. At the same time, we also strengthened our initial assessment of missing persons, which again we believe has improved our overall response to how we manage missing persons, and have seen effort be better focused, but also increased on frontline with around missing persons. We've also done things in other directions around trying to ensure that concern for welfare calls are directed to the most appropriate agency. In the vast majority of cases, 70% of cases, the police is the most appropriate agency for handling a concern for welfare. Concern for welfare being a catch-all term for an initial report of a missing person, potentially somebody with a mental health issue, or a range of other general concerns for an individual or individuals' welfare. But what we have managed to do by, again, a more comprehensive process at the front end of this, we've managed to, one, ensure that other appropriate agencies are getting cited on issues at an earlier stage and that our frontline officers are only responding to those calls where they are the most appropriate service, and the service that can make a difference in terms of the concern for welfare that is being directed to us. What that has meant is that initial call contact times has increased in duration, which has been a challenge as we've gone through. So we've seen that over performance in the past year. Our 999 performance remains the envy of many forces around the country. Our worst month over the past 12 months would have been a 91.8% target performance for 999s, and we consistently are hitting 94, 95, 96%. There's loads of stats around that, but you could say on average we answer our 999 calls in 2 or 3 seconds is our average answering calls. 101, we've done an enormous amount to understand the data on 101, and I think we're still on that journey of really understanding 101 calls. We've always had a focus around the target of 70% being answered in 30 seconds, which is the stated target. But we've been very keen to understand what call answering is across the whole of all of the calls that we receive to our 101. And it's fair to say that extracting some of that data has been a challenge to us, and we still need to understand that in detail. Some of the figures in this presented in this report may be called into question by some other figures that we've done to work. Certainly, you've got the worst presentation in this PAN report in terms of the calls. There are. We were just questioning the efficacy and the source of some of the figures, but we need to do more work on that to best understand it, so that we can give clear expectations to the public. We have done a range of things, including introducing expectation announcements to calls, so that members of the public, when they now call 101, if they are in any queue, they will receive a message which says what number they are in the queue and what the expected call time is. We know that creates, as soon as individuals hear that message, that a large proportion of our abandoned calls take place immediately on hearing that first message. We believe about 2/3 of our abandoned calls are on the first hearing of that message. Now, that's an understanding which we didn't have 2 months ago, and that's what we're trying to do in terms of that. We are seeing opportunities for other development and technology that we're seeing in other forces, but we may well have the capability to do. such as an automated ringback to 101 callers, and we've started now to scope the prospect of that moving forward.
Thank you for that. So, just again, just go over general points, and then I kind of pause for questions on those issues. Just be kind of really clear that our focus over the last couple of years has been on trying to give the member of the public who's calling for a service the best service we can, not necessarily the quickest service that we can. We hope that we can manage expectations around those two issues, but we still feel, and I as Chief feel, that when someone calls for a service for us, it's being able to make sure that they get the service right first time as best we can. And to do that, we need to understand more about what the person actually needs. That increases the time that you're spending speaking to someone, that increases the time, therefore, that call handlers are engaged with a caller, with a member of the public, and that has an effect on overall weight to have your call answered. And we are continuing, as Andrew has said, to look at different ways in which we can manage what the person is looking for in a way which reduces the number of people that have to actually then spend a considerable period of time speaking with one of our members in our control room. So lots of work still going on in this area. Appreciate that it is a very often raised issue with you, Commissioner, in public meetings, and it's an often raised issue across the force area. We're not unusual in a force in that respect. It's something that's of concern to everyone. But I hope that as we keep trying to explain to the public why we're doing what we're doing and what we hope will be the outcome for them, or what we intend to be the outcome for them, then some of the historic frustration might start to ease, and people will see that the service they get is actually, at the end of the day, a better service from Lincolnshire Police than they had in the past. And that is certainly our goal in all of the work that we're doing and all of the investment that is going into the force control room. There is some ongoing negotiations with the provider of many of the functions in the control room, and we will be presenting and discussing with you, Commissioner, in the coming weeks some of the changes to that that we will have as proposals for the contractual arrangements that take place with our third-party partner within the strategic partnership contract. So there is more to be discussed and to be done in this arena in the weeks and months ahead. But what's described is our current position, and I'll pause there for questions.
Okay, just thank you for that. A few observations and some questions. I mean, firstly, I mean, I would recognise you can have as many people answering the phone as you like. It just reduces the number of people you've got then to respond to those calls, and it is a balance between the two. You can't sort of spend it more than once, so it is a tricky balance. And we have invested in a new telephony system, and equally in the new command and control system, which will just get better and better and better over the coming months when it comes to sharpening all of that service. I suppose the difficulty is understanding what some of these numbers tell us, because actually you're right, if you are dealing with somebody once well and they don't have to call back 2 and 3 times, then actually that's a good thing, because it's really easy to answer the phone quickly, don't give them the answers they want and hang up, and you'll improve these numbers. Nobody wants that. We're not chasing a target, we're chasing service delivery and ultimately being able to keep people safe. So everything I say is in the context of understanding that challenge that you have. I mean, the first thing I would say is 1 or 2 of these numbers literally contradict each other. So on here, on page 11, it makes a point, and it could be me misunderstanding it, but it says call handling non-emergency, on average, 48.3% of non-emergency calls a month answered within 30 seconds. But then underneath the graph, it says that 70% of 101 calls are answered within 3 minutes and 91 within 10 minutes. And then it says the distribution curve shows that the majority of calls answered within 10 seconds. Well, it can't be the majority within 10 seconds if only 48% are being answered within 30. So something's not quite right there. So I guess understanding some of that data, or indeed, if that's a misunderstanding of the facts, we just need to clarify what it means so that it's helpful.
Yeah, a direct response to that point, Commissioner, is that yes, unfortunately, post-publication of this document, we picked up that there were a couple of issues with some of the data because we are on a daily basis looking at this information, and there are some clashes with the data we're looking at and the data as presented. So we will issue an update, if you like, a rectification to the page 11 with the information that I corrected.
Thank you for that. I mean, I think as well, to put it in the context, when you consider that Lincolnshire Police receive roughly 3,500 calls a year regarding missing persons, 2,000-ish for children, 1,500 for adults, another 15,000 calls concerns for safety, it puts it in the context when you think, well, in real time, somebody is answering that call, making a decision. Do I need to send an officer immediately? Do we need to send 10 officers immediately? Whatever the scenario is, and in real time these decisions are being made as to how we keep the community safe. It's a huge pressure on the people who work in the control room, and actually it's one of those areas of business that's often very little understood how complex, difficult and challenging it is to work in that environment. And you know, just a thank you to the people that do that job day in, day out. It's a long shift and hard work, and very challenging. And I think one of the things, again, that's misunderstood is the relationship with G4S as the strategic partner in having a hand in employing a lot of those staff in the control room. Often it's been said to me, well, you know, things would be much better if they were all just employed by the chief. Well, for a start, the strength and depth of data and information we have is as a direct result of having to manage the contract that we have with that partnership. So, you know, I do genuinely understand the value of how all of those elements work. One of the things that I think is probably a learning opportunity is where the changes were made to actually examine how we could get better at working for the missing persons and other areas. It was sort of after the event that we were realising there was an impact to call handling times, and it would have been good to have got ahead of that. And I'm sure you want to comment on that, but certainly as you're improving other areas, I guess it's me having that assurance that there's a plan in advance so that we understand it. Often there is an impact, but it's understanding what it will be before it happens so that we can communicate that better to the public. I'll let you come in on that point, Andrew.
And it's a very fair challenge. I think had we had our time again, the way that we implemented those changes, we would have done it differently. What we have done now is we now have a contact management transformation program, which an element, a significant element, is understanding the impact. So when we made changes, for example, on concern for welfare, we had scoped exactly what did we believe that would do at the various stages of the process, and particularly at the additional information that was being taken at the initial call handling, so that we didn't suddenly think, well, we've done that, oh dear, we didn't expect that to happen. So we have that absolutely built in now to our process change. And it's probably worth saying with the contact management transformation program that we are on the start of a journey over the next 12-18 months, of which part of it is the technology, the new command and control system, and improved use of the telephone system functionality, but also a greater effort to have initial resolution of issues at the first point of contact, rather than requiring members of the public to either make multiple contacts with us, or to be left in limbo, not quite certain what is happening with the issue that they have reported to us. So we're having a goal that where we can, we will have not simply better follow-up processes, but we will be able to resolve more at that initial point of contact, which we trust very much. Trust as, on the basis of that will improve customer service and satisfaction.
Okay, thank you for that. A couple of observations and again a question. I mean, it's good to see that the online reporting is increasing. I mean, it very much comes out in the crime and policing surveys that we do annually that the public still very much want to have that frontline 101 service to be able to report in as their preferred option. But absolutely, there's a cohort of people that genuinely don't. I mean, I love to go to Tesco's and use the automated shopping system and I don't need to talk to anybody. It's great because there are times when that's your preferred option. So an online reporting system is good for a certain amount of people, and making that better, because it's fair to say nationally these systems have been clunky. And the amount of information people have had to input has been problematic. So I know that is something that's developing, and I guess it's something that we need to work on. How do we promote that? It's not an instead of, we're not trying to turn 101 off, but it's to make sure that people understand it's there as an option and how that works, and what their service expectations are once they've put something into that system. What are they going to get back? Because I don't think that's largely been explained to the public, what happens when you do report online. I guess that one of the challenges as well, we describe 101 quite rightly as non-emergency, but it can be any number of things. I mean, we've obviously had some fairly hefty storms of late, and we're going to get some more. It can be 60 people reporting in the same incident on a road. It can equally be somebody that's finally got up the courage to report some historic sexual abuse, and you don't know which call is coming through when, and whether they're all coming at the same time. And so I suppose it's that benchmarking of what do we think acceptable and good look like, because we look at these numbers and set ourselves targets, but ultimately, what are they for? Do we think they're achievable? What's the aspiration around that? And I guess that's a wider conversation to have that we'll be having in coming weeks and months, and in particular with the response times, because again, we've set these areas, but we're typically around that sort of urban response around 70%, and then 60% in the more rural areas. Well, if that's where it is, what impact, why that target, what ultimately are we trying to achieve with all of that? And I think there's some wider conversations to have about what it actually means, because I'm always conscious that targets are quite binary. They don't necessarily tell you about what service somebody's getting, or you know, what you're ultimately striving to achieve. And I guess that's something where I'd like to explore in the future about, you know, some of that strategy and the rationale for what we're actually delivering for the public, not just are we hitting a target, yes or no, because ultimately, like we've said, we can all turn up really fast, not solve the problem, and go away again. But actually, it's about much more than that. I don't know if there's anything in there you want to comment on particularly.
Okay, I'll pass to colleague to sit, but completely agree with what you're saying, Commissioner. You're right, we want to make sure it's not just a quick resource, it's the right resource. And a lot of the activity that's taking place now is around trying to integrate what comes in from terms of the call from the member of the public who needs the attendance of police, and then us through our control room and through our deployable resources getting the right resource to them in order to kind of resolve the issue that they have. And that, you know, as we move forward, we'll see us put more resources into particular types of activity. We've mentioned road policing as one already today, but there'll be other specialisms that we would wish to have available more of in the future, and I think that's what we will have conversations with you about in the coming months ahead. But yeah, the Deputy.
So the response times is part of our performance improvement plan anyway. So again, we're looking at it in terms of, do we understand that performance information? I think the important bit from the force side of it, we have invested in technology to make sure our officers are spending as much time, and including our PCSOs, out of the stations in the areas where we need them to be. Have we got the full benefits of that? Not yet. We've got a lot of the benefits, but we haven't got the full benefits, so there's more work we need to do around that, some of the cultural changes for our staff. The second bit then is making sure that those they are out, they are in the right locations. So again, linking into the work that Karen's been doing around understanding demand, about making sure we're tasking appropriately, and certainly in a position where if somebody needs a response quickly, it's not anybody available to, it's a task, you will attend that incident. So again, quite a bit of cultural stuff, again, which is not unique to Lincolnshire, it's an issue policing UK, but we've got to get through that to make sure, again, we've got the resources, not just to take the call and make the right assessment and deploy, but then making sure it's a whole system of it. We've got the right resource going to that incident straight away, and particularly when we look at if it's not an emergency and the person's a victim of a violent crime, whether it be domestic related or a historical crime, then it makes more perfect sense that the right person, and that could be a detective, goes to that job first time without sending a uniformed officer that will do their best, but might necessarily have the same professional knowledge and understanding as an expert would have as well.
Just at the final point, in terms of online reporting, it still remains a priority to us. We're somewhat in the hands of the national development of the single online home, which at times doesn't develop its complexity as quickly as we would hope it would, but we sort of recognise that these programmes are difficult. In terms of the difference in the type of non-emergency, we certainly believe that all of our non-emergency calls are important. And you quote two examples. We know very much about the trees on falling over. Sunday was quite possibly the worst Sunday we've ever had on record for numbers of calls coming in. But in terms of the operating models that we're looking at for moving forward, actually we're starting to scope out, are we going to look at different handlers potentially taking reports of crime to those taking reports of other incidents, or for exactly that purpose of trying to pick up the complexity of somebody who may be coming and reporting for the first time in after many years, feel able to report historic sexual abuse compared to another arrangement. And it's not to demean the fallen tree, it's just the fallen tree is easier for us to manage. So we probably don't need the people that answer those calls to have as rich a skill set as the person that might be dealing with a range of crime reporting.
Thank you very much, and that's an opportune point, just again, to make the point of the tremendous support that we get from communities across the county. Sunday was another example of where many members of the public come forward to help both ourselves as the emergency services, but also fire and rescue in the county in being able to clear roads, clear debris, and try and get the county moving again. And there's a number of instances that have been brought to my attention of individuals and organisations stepping forward to give us support, and again we're once again grateful for that.
Thank you for that. There's just one other point I just wanted to raise before we move on, and that it's something that comes up time and again with the public, which is around when they report things, them getting feedback on that, and that remains a challenge nationally, not just in Lincolnshire, but in particular people are saying, well, I reported a thing, I don't know what happened with that thing, so what's the point in reporting another thing if I don't know if you even did anything with that? And I think that's a piece of work that's ongoing, but it's something that I think the public would really appreciate us getting to grips with. And also about that managing of expectation. You know, if we aren't going to come in a particular time scale, I think often through genuinely wanting to help and support, we can overpromise. And I think that's always a risk, because the public generally are understanding and patient if they understand the circumstances. So again, it's trying to set those parameters as part of some of these changes to make sure that we set expectations at the reasonable, but then meet them.
You make a really good point there, Commissioner, in terms of the feedback to the public and our public engagement. In relation to specific incidents, it's not always practical to do that, so if we get information about some criminal activity, we quite often take it away and it might be several weeks or months before it comes to a conclusion. So when we do have those operations where it started off from community intelligence, we do like to make sure that when we go for the big bang, etc., and arrest individuals or bring charges to individuals, that we do credit where the information's come from, just to let the public know that the information that they give us is very valuable and we do use it. We're also working on developing our neighbourhood police and community engagement plans, which will then address some of these issues about having that dialogue with the communities about what they're saying to us and how do we respond to them, what their priorities are, and we're working with those communities to address some of those things.
Thank you very much. Move on to the next section, which is around intervention. There are a number of issues highlighted on page 16 of the report in terms of my commentary. I will ask my fellow executive members to kind of speak to those various areas. Just one that's not mentioned that I just wanted to kind of highlight. We had the first National Police Forum meeting, Leadership Forum meeting, which I think is the new guise of the National School for Government, basically an agency which brings together senior leaders from across all of the public sectors in the country with a view to developing better working relationships between sectors such as senior leaders in the health service, police, government and so on. And at that day there was an awards ceremony where 80 different public sector projects had been put forward for recognition for how well they had delivered integrated public services to protect or otherwise care for the communities. And our project, which is based in Lincoln, which I know, Commissioner, you were largely instrumental in the kind of creation of and the bringing together of agencies around it, which was looking at homelessness and street sleeping within the city of Lincoln and other parts of the county, was one of the top 4 of those. It was essentially the runner-up to the eventual award winner. So a massive positive recognition of the multi-agency work to intervene with very vulnerable members of our community and to show some real kind of positive outcomes. So well worth recognising that activity. I'd like to kind of pass over now to the Deputy, who will take us through some of the areas here.
Yeah, so obviously we're making particular reference to page 16 of the report. Again, rape, again, nationally reported, well reported over the last 12 months, certainly the last couple of months, in terms of not just about recording, but making sure the outcomes are right. And again, you'll be aware of part of the criminal justice commissioning review. Ultimately, we'll certainly look at rape victims and making sure they're being supported, not just in terms of when they reported it, but prior to, and more importantly, during and after the court proceedings as well, if it goes to a court proceedings. Again, we have seen increases in the county. Again, the figures show that the increase, again, it's important to recognise nearly 25% of those are of a year old as well, which becomes quite challenging for the investigators, because the reality is we're trying to get evidence that's no longer there, what would be potentially if it happened more recently. But again, now we recognise it's part of our protecting vulnerable people. It's the work that we do, not just in the force, but recognise work with the partners, and again, particularly through the victim care services, and again, the work of the specialist sexual offences teams as well. In terms of what's changed since our last time we was here, again, importantly for the county, we did introduce Operation Encompass. Again, that's a way where we recognise that a young child, if they are experiencing domestic abuse, could impact them when they go to school the next day, and could certainly impact them for the rest of their life. And again, by making sure we notify the relevant school of that occurrence, their school can then do their part in safeguarding, protecting, and making sure they work with that young person as well. And since we've introduced that in January, again, we've seen a number of referrals. I think it says in the report 89 notifications to schools. Importantly, that's 89 notifications we didn't have before. So that's, again, 89 opportunities for that school to understand what may be affecting that young person at school that day, and making sure they're then supporting not just that day, but the rest of their schooling ages as well. Nationally recognised, making a big difference, and fits into the work that we're doing. And we need to do more around protecting our young people around adverse childhood experiences. And again, I know it's work particularly from the local county council of keen to evolve with our safeguarding capability as well, so which is a good news story. Likewise, we've seen new legislation brought into act within in the UK, well, within England particularly, since the 20th of January. Again, we've done some work within the force to make sure people are aware of it, and again, there's some more work through our campaigns and making sure that our staff not just are aware of it, but can update it as well. Again, we can certainly give some updates on that in future meetings in terms of what we're doing about it, what difference is it making, and importantly, how is it protecting the victim. The last 2 bits on the report, again, missing persons, I think we've touched on already about the volume, but also the vulnerability of individuals there, and what we're doing to make sure we're protecting not just the one occurrence, but particularly those that are repeat missing persons. How do we make sure we protect them in the future as well? But also the bottom section, and again, it would be a miss of me to come to any meeting without talking about drugs. But again, we recognise, going back to the bit around the reasons for people committing crime, drugs is a key driver of crime. So again, nationally reported, very similar here, 45% of house burglaries, robberies, cars being broken into are directly linked to drugs. Likewise, violent crime and homicide particularly, 50% is linked to drugs. So again, there is some work we're doing, and again, I'm pleased to say we're working with partners to do this, so it's not just the police trying to do it on their own, but again, we've got an event, a first event, there'll be a number of events where working with public health and the local county council, doing the whole systems approach to substance misuse, because it's not just about drugs, there's the wider issues around alcohol as well, to make sure we come up with a strategy that's evidence-based, that will make the biggest difference to our communities. Because whilst, yes, and we saw it last week, we will continue to pursue those that create the greatest harm to our communities around serious and organised crime, And last week you would have seen a number of individuals sentenced to over 260 years for drug supply in our county that was committed from outside the county, particularly into Essex and Sheffield. But there was also local individuals there committed in those offences as well. But we also recognise without stopping the need for drugs, and that's around effective treatment services, effective referral processes, linked to the alcohol disposal opportunities that we have as a force, then reality is whilst the demand's there for drugs, the need for drugs, supply will come, and we've got to do both together. That's all.
If I can just cover and add two more bits to what Jason's mentioned there, Commissioner. On missing persons, we've seen the adults missing numbers, they've gone up over the last few months. And January is always a particularly difficult time for people who are in crisis for whatever reason, and sadly we've had a number of suicides in January. So we are referring into and working with a working group within partners to see what we can do about trying to address the suicides within the county. So we've just signed an information sharing agreement to make us more effective in terms of sharing some of the data, so we can try and understand what we can do to put some more interventions in place. And the other thing I just wanted to mention around domestic abuse, which wasn't covered in the report. We're doing lots of work with partners to identify and highlight domestic abuse, so it's not just reliant on the individual and the victims to come forward or the neighbours to come forward. So today, for instance, we've got a multi-agency domestic abuse conference on where we've got lots of hairdressers, businesses, taxi drivers, etc. coming to it. So we're raising awareness with other agencies to identify the signs and vulnerabilities that come across it about domestic abuse, and that they can then signpost individuals into that, or they can flag up to agencies such as ourselves to put some interventions in place.
Thank you very much for that. I mean, it obviously covers a wide-ranging set of areas, this section, and again, there isn't really one that's just about policing. It's that societal challenge that we have, and some of that in particular is about getting people to a position where they feel confident enough to report. And obviously some of the changes we've made and continue to make around victim services to make it possible for people to access those services even if they haven't at that point contacted the police first, I think are significant, because it might be through access to those services that they feel strong enough and able enough to be able to report those crimes. So obviously we want to encourage people to report crime, but equally we need to recognise that some people's needs need to come to the forefront, and we continue to strive to do that. In particular, I think it's one of those challenges when you're trying to understand whether a rising number of recorded incidents is a matter of more crime being committed or whether it's more confidence in people coming forward to report. It's very complicated, particularly around domestic abuse and rape and sexual offences generally, because we know, for example, when you get a strong storyline across television programmes, that can lead to an increase in people coming forward, which, again, we welcome the fact that they've gathered the strength to come forward, but equally it shows that there are people out there that are not coming forward to report, and obviously we want them to feel very confident that they'll be taken seriously and that the system is there to help and support them. But equally it does make it hard when we're then looking at the numbers, trying to say, well, actually, are we seeing a rise in criminal behaviour in our community, or is it people coming forward? In particular, I think the work that you're leading on, Jason, around the drugs and county lines is very welcome. A new drug strategy, a substance misuse strategy for the county, I think, is something that, as partners, we need, and just a different approach to it. And in particular, I think most people would recognise that they would expect robust action taken against those supplying drugs into communities, accepting, as we'll be aware, that sometimes vulnerable people are used to do that and they're dealt with appropriately. But it is that element that's at the more vulnerable end, where you've got vulnerable people that have become the customers of those people, and making sure that we take an appropriate approach around that as a partnership. I think most people would recognise that they, when they were asked what they wanted to do with their life at the age of 14 or 15 by the careers advisor at school, they were unlikely to say, well, what I want is to become addicted to one substance or another, which will inhibit my ability to sort of have an effective family life and or work, etc., etc. That is not where somebody sets out wanting to be, and we need to support them to help that change that they need to sort of break that cycle. It's not always about making them part of the criminal justice system. What I will say, though, the particular operation you alluded to, which has recently gone through the courts, I think was a substantial piece of work, and I actually visited Judge Peeney, who sort of oversaw that, not to discuss that case in any way, shape or form, to be clear, but just to talk about generally the approach that Lincolnshire takes to some of those big, complex cases that can take a significant amount of time, and he was exceptionally complimentary about the approach that the force takes in presenting the evidence and making sure that he's got what he needs to be able to oversee those cases effectively. And I think that was came across really clearly from doing that. And I think ultimately, you know, it does take a lot of court time, and we have seen a reduction in the number of sitting days in courts, which is a challenge for them. So I think getting things to court with the right evidence in the right way is really important to making sure our criminal justice system operates in anything like a functional way. Specifically around obviously some of the areas where you've identified there with the child sexual abuse, you've alluded to a particular area of business, and obviously potentially, you know, that's of huge concern to the public. I'm not asking you to go into details of that case, but it's really that reassurance piece about the fact that we are, you know, where are the force sort of embedded across the county to actually identify these kind of incidents, because we've seen several incidents nationally where we've seen vulnerable young people exploited, and then we've seen significant cases come forward. I just want some reassurance really that you know, we're on top of things in that regard across the county, that we're not seeing things you know, that aren't coming to the fore being investigated.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Commissioner, and we've been really determined to make sure that we don't suffer as far as we can some of the tragic circumstances that have occurred in other forces, whereby it's been revealed through other means that there's been sexual exploitations and gangs going on without the services knowing or taking any proactive stance to it. We've and this has been commented on in the Peel inspection, we've put out a very, very comprehensive programme of making sure that all of our frontline officers understand when somebody might be subject to child sexual exploitation. So when they're missing from home, if there's any particular behavioural traits that they have when they're talking to partners, etc. So we do have lots of referrals that come in, and all of those referrals that come in to us, they're taken through the MACE, the multi-agency child sexual exploitation programme. Our PVP teams look at this really detailed, and so and this is where the one that's highlighted on the report has actually come from. And because this is us looking proactively at what those signs and symbols are, is there something we need to look deeper at? We've taken the lid off that and we've looked into it to find something that could easily just be missed if we weren't on top of our game. So if I can give you that reassurance that this is what we do, because we don't want to be letting anybody down and something going on under our noses without us knowing about it. And that's what's led us to this particular case that we're looking at there. And a little bit of assurance around the rape figures as well, in terms of how we're approaching that. Probably about just under a third of the rapes are historic, and again that is because they come to light when we're dealing with individuals, generally through other purposes. So if we've got a current domestic abuse situation, the way that we go about it and the interventions that our officers have now will draw out anything that's historic there. So we will pick it up that way. Some of the acute sexual offences that have occurred over the last couple of months, where we've had an individual who's been subject of multiple behaviours, so stranger rapes, etc. We've had somebody in court recently. We've been very, very proactive, and we've brought those to identify the suspects and the individuals and brought them in as quickly as we can. So I'm really comfortable with how effective our officers are if there is something happening in the community that we're unaware of and it's not domestic related, such as a stranger abuse or rape.
Okay, just one other point I'd just like you to expand on. One of the things that nationally HMIC FRS were commenting on was the fact that they didn't believe it was evenly being applied across the country, arrests around domestic abuse. And they were critical, they were of some areas over other areas, and really, I'll be honest, I didn't think, I'll be critical of them for a change. I didn't think their communications particularly were helpful in the sense that they were a bit broad brush. So, you know, from our perspective, looking at Lincolnshire, you know, how do you think we fare, given that that criticism was levelled at policing generally?
Yeah, I saw the HMI comments on that, and Lincolnshire's arrest rates for domestic abuse have gone down substantially. I haven't got the detail of why that is, because that just came out in the media this week. So I am actually looking into that to see, is there anything that we're doing differently that we've dropped the ball on, or is there something else that we should be learning from other people that we should be doing differently? I'm comfortable that all of the domestic abuse arrests that come through and the reports that come through go through a very rigorous process within our the safeguarding hub, and we've got a new safeguarding hub there with some new investment of officers into that to make sure that if there is anything that we should be picking up, working with partners or taking in a different direction, we do actually do that. But I recognise that we might not have all the answers if we haven't looked outside of ourselves in Lincolnshire, so I do want to explore that a little bit further afield.
I'll just come back on that single point. That's very welcome. Speaking to PCC colleagues about their experiences around the country, and one of the things that came out was the fact that because of some of the changes in crime recording, that obviously some people that were reporting historic incidents of abuse were then being recorded as separate incidents of abuse, which had then left, obviously, because you're only arresting the same individual, if you like, and it wasn't necessarily as clear-cut as there had been a drop in arrests for separate cases, if you see what I mean. And I suppose it would be useful as part of that to understand where the crime data integrity changes have impacted on that, because I think there is a risk that they affect public confidence, where actually it doesn't mean that there necessarily has been a drop in service from the force. So I think it is important that we understand the context in which you're operating, and that's why I'm concerned to make sure that we understand, because I don't necessarily think it's a drop in standards so much as an issue of confidence because of the way it's been recorded, if that makes sense. But I think we need to understand whether that's right or not.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. That I believe you've kind of hit the nail on the head in relation to it. The information that we have in relation to kind of other activity that we're doing, particularly when it comes to issues of the criminal justice system. So when we look at those who come into contact with us as suspects, we either treat them as people who are then going to be released on bail or going to be released under further investigation. As a result of the work led by Lincolnshire, as a region, we are the best region in the country, in England and Wales, in the way in which we're approaching that, and as a force, we're leading the way in how well managed and scrutinised that part of the process is, which is effectively line managers looking at every instance of domestic abuse and making sure that the appropriate handling of that individual takes place. We've also included the national outcomes around knife crime and sexual offending, but we've also included hate crime, because we feel that that is also a massively important area where the suspect should be managed in the best way possible. So that is counter to the notion that we're not arresting enough people or arresting the right number of people for domestic abuse, when so much focus is given by the force, by custody suites, by supervisors on that particular crime taking place. And I would agree with you that I think it's more an issue in relation to those offences which are reported where there is no immediate prospect of an arrest increasing, and therefore the proportion as a result decreasing. But as the ACC has said, we will look very closely at this. It has been for a while and it remains a priority, so we will definitely be looking at what that data says so that we do understand it better. But our starting position is this has got a very, very heavy focus already, and we just need to make sure that it's not telling us something that's incorrect.
Yeah, just one more point based on something that you've alluded to, and I don't think there's going to be anywhere else it's going to crop up, and that you mentioned hate crime. I just wanted to raise a point because PCCs have been contacted by our PCC lead who covers the area of hate crime, and they communicated to us to see whether we would feel it was appropriate to speak to our chief constables about including, in effect, misogyny as a hate crime, and that isn't something that I intend to do. And I just wanted to sort of make the point so that we've got it documented that it's not because I don't believe that that is an issue as a society we should tackle. We absolutely should. But I do believe that the areas that have been very clearly identified around hate crime are there for a very specific reason. And I don't feel personally that I would want to water down the effect we are having in those areas which clearly need to have robust action taken against them. So, you know, whether partners across the county wish to look at a more broader gender-based set of societal challenges, that's for a different meeting. But I won't be writing to you to highlight that because I was concerned that actually whether that colleague has contacted the NPCC as well to suggest that, I don't know. But I thought I'd be clear and have it on record that I don't intend to suggest that.
Thank you for making that clear, Commissioner, and you know, we as an executive team and me as Chief would agree with your stance. Okay, Commissioner, we're going to move on to the next item. I don't have a great deal to say under this section, which is around the outcomes. A large part of it was around driving enforcement, and we've already discussed that. We've got some good information there around firearms licensing. The word I would say is that this has been a real kind of success story from the management perspective. We continue to work with certificate holders. We do appreciate that we've got one of those, it goes in a sort of cycle, and we've got a bulge coming up in terms of the numbers who will be looking at renewal, and we have already kind of plans for how we will manage that. It's essentially a success story for both sides of that in terms of holders and us as the licensing kind of authority. I mentioned outcomes, that we are, as I say, the best region in the country in relation to that, and it's a bit nip and tuck between us and Wales, but we are also, in terms of force-wise, we are leading the way in a lot of these outcomes. The next bit on the agenda for that, government have announced that there will be a Royal Commission on Criminal Justice. The policing won't form a specific element of that, but clearly our partner agencies will. So we are already starting to do the thinking around what will our contribution to that Royal Commission be, and we're pulling together some meetings in the future around to get ourselves prepared for that. Custody was particularly highlighted by HMI as an area of good practice and good work for us, and so that's a kind of positive story. But there wasn't really much else I wanted to say about this section. I think we're happy to take questions or move on.
Yeah, just quickly, I mean, the firearms story has been a remarkable change. I mean, back in 2016, we were very much at the bottom of the nation, really, when it came to this. But let's be fair, there were 20,000 licence holders, 50,000 legally held firearms across our county alone. It's a significant task to make sure they're effectively licensed and in time. But that said, it was so significantly out of kilter with where we should have been that it was one heck of a task to get it anywhere near. And actually we've gone above and beyond bringing it into what would be a reasonable level of service and acceptability for managing that safeguarding of the public to get to this point where we've obviously got now nationally the ability for people to pay online as a result of the work Lincolnshire have done. I mean, it beggars belief that actually the standard method of payment in 2016 was postal order. I mean, I didn't even know you could still buy postal orders at that point in time. So it has dragged it forward 150 years into an acceptable level of service and beyond. The question for me is around getting further assurance that we'll be able to meet that demand coming up, because it's such a significant peak that we don't want the service to end up back where it was, and the team that have done such a lot of hard work to sort of slip back. So outside of now, I would be very welcome to see the preparation for that. The other element for me as well is how we avoid these peaks. So what is the plan for removing those peaks and troughs so we end up with a smooth service but ongoing? And I appreciate there's some challenges about how we do that, but I think it is an important piece of work to take forward. But again, yes, you're absolutely right. HMI have also identified the area of custody. And just going right back to an earlier piece, they also said in their report that Lincolnshire was quick at answering 999 and 101 service. So I think it's important to make that point that HMI consider the force of performing well in that area. So there is some really good work. I mean, the RUI, I feel, is probably going to be reviewed nationally. And I think that is something that I personally welcome. I would think a lot of people will. It's not necessarily a problem that government wish to try other ways of dealing with things, but I think it shows the strength of any government when they acknowledge that they need to review it and look at it afresh. It's not necessarily been the huge success that was hoped, but I think Lincolnshire are managing it exceptionally well, given where others have been with that, which is to be commended. So that was it. There's no real question in there other than to get that assurance around the firearms.
And we'll give that to you. As I say, there are plans underway in relation to managing that peak of demand. Moving on then to page 22, which is around satisfaction and complaints. We've said a little bit already around the very kind of strong link around expectation and meeting expectation with the resources available, and the work that's ongoing within the Force Control Room to change that. You very rightly highlight that one of the biggest gaps around expectation and delivery is the follow-up. So the initial response is generally speaking felt to be quite good, but there's a gap then in following up, and that leads to dissatisfaction. So that is a specific area where we have in terms of our improvement plan that we're looking at. I will pass on to colleagues who will say a bit more about that. In terms of complaints, we, as of the 1st of February, moved into new conduct regulations, and there's information internally within the force around that. Basically, as far as the public are concerned, the biggest change is that there's now a specific emphasis on learning from service failure. So where the organisation has let a member of the public down, rather than leaping straight into an issue of blame and conduct for the individual officers, there's a very specific focus on trying to learn the lesson from that service failure, and the organisation accept responsibility for kind of changing. And there's things such as reflective practice and review, which are being introduced or have been introduced by the new regulations. Also a role for yourself as Commissioner in terms of the appeal body, if someone's not satisfied with the way in which the force handles their complaint. I met with the regional director for the Office of Police Conduct, the Independent Office of Police Conduct, yesterday by coincidence, and we had a discussion, and essentially his feedback to me as Chief Constable was that he felt Lincolnshire Police was doing very well in how it managed conduct and how it managed the complaints that we handled. And his region is a much larger region in the East Midlands. It goes as far south as Wiltshire. It goes north from Derbyshire as well. So it was quite reassuring to hear directly from him that he felt that the force was doing well in this arena, and he had no concerns at all to raise with me. We discussed other issues in terms of relationships with things like the Crown Prosecution Service instead. So that was my general overview. I don't know which way around you want to do. Do you want to go?
Just in relation to the user satisfaction piece there, Commissioner. We're wrapping that up into the whole victim's journey rather than just a user satisfaction, which can be very much about their call for service and ticking a box of a quantitative survey. We have started with a victim focus, working alongside yourselves within Victim Links and the staff that you have there, but to understand not just the quantitative data about how well we're doing, which comes under the VCOP programme, victim satisfaction, etc., and follow-up, as the Chief's mentioned, but also the cultural issues. So we have victims declining to support prosecutions, etc., and their understanding of what they can get out of contacting the police for service in the future. Some of it is around how do we deal with them if we're treating people as a commodity by saying we've got a tick box and you will come to this desktop interview, and we're not giving them that face-to-face interaction. So we're trying to balance that about reducing some of the demands, such as the shoplifting type work that Andrew's been doing in the control room, with identifying the people who actually really do need to see somebody and have an interaction with them, whether it's face-to-face or whether it's a telephone call. So the whole journey is there for them, to give them the confidence that right throughout they're either signposted to individuals who are specialists to help, such as Victim Links, or they are given that specific responsibility from the officers in charge within our service. Part of that approach is also the outcomes that the victims expect to get, and that's where the restorative justice piece comes into it for me. So we have very much under restorative justice that dealing with juveniles, a very good outcome. Lots of our juveniles who go through the diversionary panel do not go on to commit offences, and the work that we've done around pathways has been really substantial. We haven't got the same approach and the same rigour around adults. So ensuring that we've got restorative justice and community approach outcomes based into that will give the victims much more of an opportunity to have a say about how we can help them heal some of the hurt that they've experienced. So we will be bringing that in. We've invested in more staff going into the ARC, the Assistant Rehabilitation Programme, within the partnership world of the Community Safety Programme. We've got a new Assistant Director, Di Coulson, who's just started in there this month, and we're reviewing how we actually get more interaction with troubled individuals who are going through that programme, not just within the core hours of Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, but actually stepping outside of that on weekends and on evenings as well, to be there, to be able to support and redirect people into a good pathway as opposed to a poor pathway from that. And then we've also invested in, or yourself has also invested in the Domestic Abuse Perpetrator Programme with County Council and given the support that we need to do there. So again, that all of that helps support the victim's journey about not becoming repeat victims, about how they can support themselves going forward and how they can understand how they can feel and get a better outcome for what their needs are, not just what our process needs are.
Thank you for that. I think one of the challenges is when you're trying to judge satisfaction, it's very difficult to isolate elements of it. So you might be really pleased with the way the force has dealt with you and interacted with you, but if you don't like the outcome, then you're not satisfied. That doesn't necessarily mean that the officers that you've interacted with have been deficient in any way, shape or form if you don't get the outcome that you want. And so it is quite difficult to isolate those elements, and ultimately you just don't want to be a victim of crime in the first place. So it's quite difficult to feel satisfied at the end of a process that you didn't want to willingly enter into anyway. So I can understand why it's very difficult, but it is concerning to go, how do we actually make sure that we take the public with us under these tough circumstances to make sure they're getting out of it what they want. And time and again it tends to come down to that, am I feeling that I've been updated in the right way, etc. And they're the elements I think as well that are within our control in some respects to get right. I mean, one area that does concern me in particular around the way that our leap forward by use of technology with the mobile devices that the officers carry, which have been exceptionally successful, is that area around accessing of victim services, because it is a good thing that we've now got the ability to say, do you want somebody to contact you for this? I think what's very difficult is that we've seen a drop-off in in people saying yes, largely because it's a binary question, often very early in the process. So at the point when you visit a property and they're just angry that somebody's sort of committed a crime against them, it's very difficult for them to understand that actually there will be value in that. And I guess there's some work around that. And in particular, I'd pay tribute to Marc, who's been working very hard on that, and he's taken a lot of time to understand the various range of services that sit below victims links, the strength and depth of that, and has put together a bit of a video to go on the intranet to make sure that officers are aware of what's available. But I think working together on that to make sure that we're offering the services would, I think there's a little bit more that we can do together on that. But in particular, I think there is that wider piece of going, how do we create that satisfaction, accepting that there is always going to be some challenge around that. I don't think you're ever going to get 100% of people say, we're really happy that we've had this interaction. But I think we can do better. And it's understanding, well, what's our aspiration and how are we going to get there?
I completely agree with you, and it's identifying what is the expectation of the individual who's contacted us, and if their expectations are really, really high or something that we just can't actually facilitate, then they're never going to be happy. So it's about rebalancing the expectation that they have when they contact us. But in relation to some of the things such as the automation of victim referrals, it's about the question that we're asking as well. So if we're just asking somebody, do you want to be referred to a victim support, then quite often you'll get no. But if we say, ask the question in a different way, is there any reason why we should not refer you to a victim support services, then we'd probably get the no as well, that there isn't any reason not to, so therefore we automatically would.
Okay, that's really helpful. I think, again, I obviously meet with your professional standards department to discuss the overall complaints, and it's always concerning when we see the number of complaints going up, but I have been assured that there doesn't appear to be a pattern, that the force is very much on top of its game in understanding what's going on underneath the numbers, and I guess that is a continual process to review that, but I'm genuinely very assured that the force is doing that. You alluded to the fact that the system has changed regarding complaints. There were three options really for PCCs to look at. Option one was the lightest touch, which most PCCs across the country have gone for, which is basically taking on the role of dealing with the appeals process, which is the method that we've gone for here. One or two force areas have gone for the fact that the PCC effectively takes everything to do with complaints from the outset. I felt quite strongly that wasn't the right approach. I've always believed organisations learn best from managing situations themselves and having that learning culture from within. I don't think it would have added value to the public for me to remove that from the police force and then sit it separately, which is why I chose to do it that way. And I would like to think that that will sort of continue to be the right approach moving forward. But that's all I've got to say on that section, if you wanted to move on.
Thank you, Commissioner. So the final section is around resources. On page 24, I highlight issues around deployable resources, the Horizons programme, which I'll ask the Deputy to say a bit more about, and absence levels. But I just wanted to get to two high-level things. First of all, well, three in fact, sorry. The first is, as we've mentioned a couple of times during the course of the morning, overall resourcing is one of the kind of fundamental building blocks about how you're able to deliver a service, whether that service be good, excellent, or average or poor. Its overall resourcing levels are a big part of that. We were doing the right thing. I completely believe in getting back to living within the means of the force, and we were projecting to end this year at a balanced budget. Now that would have meant that we were within some of the lowest staffing levels for many, many years, certainly lower staffing levels than we had 10, 15 years ago. That would have presented as a monumental struggle for the force to go forward and deliver the kinds of service we would have hoped for our public. A number of things have changed in the recent few months, which have changed that picture for the positive. And as you are aware, we are looking to recruit additional officers. We have additional resources coming in to help support some of the infrastructure that will support those officers. And we're looking at every way possible to maximise the revenue into the force and then turn that into something which delivers a good, better and hopefully excellent service for our public. Few principles underlying that. One is very still firmly of the view that increasing the resources for everybody in policing across England and Wales still leaves us at the bottom. It's a better, higher bottom place than it was before, but it's still at the bottom, and that we still feel strongly needs to change. So there are still arguments to be made with central government about future changes to either levelling up or bringing in a review of the formula itself as to how central government resources are allocated. And we will, with your support, continue to work hard at specific bits of money that we can access. We mentioned the Violent Crime Reduction Fund that we weren't able to bid into, but there are some other funds that we can try to bid into that might bring in small pots of money, but nevertheless valuable additional resources to the force. Very grateful for approaching the view of the precept rise and very clear that the money that's gathered in locally through precept should show a return for our public, and we're very clear about the areas that we are going to invest in or use that money to try and improve services. So that's again a welcome addition to our overall resource base. But we will keep fighting the corner for a better result from the national allocation of resources. Absence levels, well, the people that we've got, we're showing some of the best as in lowest absence levels that we've seen for at least a year and a half, and looking back over trend lines for some time. So some of the things that we feel that we're doing, it's early green shoots, but it shows that we are having a workforce which is feeling better about itself, and that there are some aspects of that which are resulting in availability being greater because people are less absent. And finally, I wanted to say with the third thing was that whilst it's not highlighted particularly in the report, again, a really kind of good piece of news. The Lincoln Chamber of Commerce had its awards ceremony in relation to big partnership building projects and infrastructure projects, and the South Park project, which was the Blue Light Campus, the co-location of fire and rescue, police and ambulance service down at the new build within South Park in Lincoln, won the overall award for the kind of public sector construction project. So that was a great, again, endorsement for the investment that a number of people have made over a number of years to bring about what will be a fantastic facility for Lincoln and for the whole force across those blue light services. I do read these reports just because of what I'm about to say, but sometimes when you read it second time or third time, you can pick up on something. So in the deployable resources, there's a bit of language that I'll get changed because we don't have natural wastage. Sounds awful, when we talk about reduction of our FT. We don't naturally waste anyone in our organisation. We don't unnaturally waste anyone. So I'll change that language, Commissioner, because what it is simply seeing people who retire or move on in the organisation, and that if you don't replace them, then you see a reduction in the numbers. So it's a natural reduction in the workforce as a result of people moving on, nothing to do with wasting anyone. I just wanted to make that clear. So I'll pass on to the Deputy, if you don't mind, to talk about the Horizons programme.
Yeah, so Horizons, again, we've obviously spoken about it briefly at previous PAM meetings. Horizons obviously is ultimately the Forces transformation programme, not just look about the next 12 months, look at the next 3 years realistically in terms of understanding demand, future demand, recognising the opportunity with increasing police officer numbers hopefully coming into the organisation, and then supported by relevant police staff, etc. around that. But also recognising, are we delivering the best possible service we can in line with the ambition of Dr. the Force, but yourself, Commissioner, and making sure then that, again, we're not just doing the work to make sure we're match fit, but making sure we're recruiting the people to deliver that service, but also making sure that we're doing the training relevant, continuing professional development for our staff as well. At the same time, making sure we're balancing the books, because the reality is we can only spend the money that we've got, can't spend any more than we haven't got. Now, key bit for me is that some of this does link into some of the issues around the HMIC, recent peer inspection about future planning. The fact is that we've got some capability, to be fair, we've invested internally within the force, with your support, to do that, because we recognise actually, to actually get that 3 to 4 year plan linking to delivering against distinctive Lincolnshire, which is our strategy in terms of our ambition. The reality is, if we don't spend that investment in there, we're not going to get to where we need to get to, and certainly we're not deliver the best possible service we want to deliver, which ultimately the public expect as well. So, early days with it. Again, the resourcing is just about in place now from the support and recognising the funding that we've got, and certainly in terms of the work streams of understanding demand, the piece around the uplift and bringing people in, the attraction piece, and then the target operating model, which covers some of the community engagement work that we need to do, both strategically, tactically and operationally, is all built into that as well. So again, we look forward to updating here that progresses and ultimately coming with an overall plan that I know you're keen to see.
And final thing for me is just to give what I hope is a word of reassurance that we are very, very focused on the fact that we are not simply going to grow, as we will be over the next year, 2, 3 years, just back to where we were in 2012 or some other point in the past, because that's not the organisation we need for 5 years' time, 10 years' time, 15 years' time. So we're very much making sure that as we grow, we're growing into the places that we need to have the numbers, the capacity and the capability to meet the challenges of today and tomorrow, not try and just go back to something that met challenges, if indeed it did meet them, of the past. So it's growing in new directions, not simply replacing gaps from the past.
Thank you very much for that. And you know, obviously, I appreciate we discuss a lot of this information in lots of different places, but this is the most public one, so I appreciate we need to cover a little bit of ground more than once. I mean, one of the things that came up recently at the Police and Crime panel was trying to explain what we meant by the PCSO numbers, because in different places we described it as 100 and then as 85, where actually what we're currently running at is around 100, but 15 are doing other duties, so some working within the reducing reoffending space and other specialist areas. So actually what we're talking about is 85 being the honest and transparent number we're talking about to the public about being deployable in neighbourhoods in the traditional sense. So I just wanted to make that point because it's been expressed that way to be clear and transparent, because it'd be very easy just to say it's 100 and just let people assume that means that they're 100 in the community. Just before I bring you in, because there's another question I've got on that. You alluded to the terminology in that particular section, but it does say there's no planned recruitment in 2020-21. So if our object is to stay at the 85 plus the 15, if we're not recruiting, presumably at the end of another year, we will have dropped well below that. So I don't know what, just for some clarity around that aspiration, because the numbers we took to the Police and Crime panel was sort of suggesting we were holding the line at those kind of numbers.
So the two quick points that in reverse order, I suppose so the point about the numbers is kind of well made. Again, and this may introduce confusion into the language as we kind of go forward, is the difference between a full-time equivalent and a head count. I just wanted to clarify that point. So we, as the force, will, as far as is reasonably possible, talk about the full-time equivalent, and that's basically the number of people you can afford if they were working full-time. So 85 full-time equivalent PCSO posts is what the force can afford, and they're deployed in neighbourhoods. Now that might be more people, because you might have 2 part-time people, or 3 or 4 or 5 part-time people. So your head count, if you all line them up in a room, will be more than 85. And that will become increasingly important when we talk about police officer numbers, because government are talking in terms of head count, and we often in our papers talk about the affordable full-time equivalent of that headcount, and the numbers therefore can very often look confusing and different. So just again making that point. But yes, Commissioner, what the 85 is the full-time equivalent post that we have deployed in our neighbourhood model. We are able to protect that now as a result of the outcomes in the last few months, and that is what we will have going forward. The 15 are the people which we are able to distribute into other parts of the organisation to do really, really useful work around prevention and early intervention. And what we will do is keep a very close eye on the numbers as it rolls forward as to whether in the coming financial year, so the next 12 months, actually there's any need to have a recruitment. Well, what we're saying is we don't anticipate, given what the individual are telling us about potential retirement, resignation or moving on, that we will have to do that, but we will definitely keep it under very close eye. It's one of these things that we monitor every month. So
yes, I mean currently we think that the numbers that will leave of our PCSOs is likely to be quite low over the next 2 years, because there's been a number of things happened in terms of where the changes where PCSOs might naturally go. So a number of them will be in new police officer recruitment intakes and the like. But largely what we have done is now the existing workforce is now entirely covered in terms of that they wish to remain as being PCSOs. So we don't think they'll be going away from us apart from the natural reasons of retirement or some other circumstance happening which we can't predict at this moment.
Thank you for that. I'm conscious of time, so I'll be very brief. Obviously, one of the things that's a challenge is, and there's the whole thing in the round about having the right amount of mix of people, whether it's PCSOs, police staff, police officers, volunteers. Getting that whole piece right is important, because it isn't just about, God, I'm sounding like a previous government. It's not just about numbers, but it isn't just about police officer numbers, although we need an amount of those. What was interesting when you look back, actually, on average, we've lost about 15 officers per year since about 2004. So it isn't that something mystical happened a decade ago. It's been happening a lot longer than that in Lincolnshire, and actually over the last few years we've broadly maintained that number at around 1,100 full-time equivalent, and we're still in the position where broadly we're projected to drop significantly below, but with the uplift and then with our budget setting process over the next few weeks, hopefully we'll be in a position of broadly maintaining that still, which is excellent news. But nevertheless, I think it is that thing that, like you say, we need to keep under review and see what we need to do. And in particular, not for now, but it's certainly something we've committed to as part of the council tax, is to look at how we look to recruit and retain more people into the volunteering side, the special constables, and especially as they've been so successful as joining the police that actually we lose them from one side but gain them in another, and that's something I know that we'll be working up plans for. But I've got no further questions around that. Anything anybody else wants to add? If not, we'll bring the meeting to a close. Thank you very much. The next meeting is in June, 16th of June, 2 days before the anniversary of the Battle of Waterloo, for anybody that will be celebrating that. Yeah, just thank you very much for your attendance.